Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to this explainer. If you've ever wondered how these massive, sweeping theories of global economics actually trickle down to dictate the day-to-day decisions on a manager's desk, well, you are definitely in the right place. We're going to take a really fascinating look at the very foundation of how our world operates. We're talking moving from grand societal concepts all the way down to the daily tactical moves that actually keep an enterprise running smoothly. So, here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with needs versus limited resources, then explore the role of organizations, break down the 3 levels of management, and finally, we'll unpack the core management functions.
All right, Section 1, Needs versus Limited Resources. This is the fundamental tension of our entire economy. Here is the ultimate universal problem laid bare for us. On one side, we have unlimited human needs. As a species, our desires are essentially boundless, right? We are constantly pushing for more nourishing food, more advanced shelter, deeper connections, continuous growth. But on the flip side, we're constrained by limited societal resources. We live on a planet with finite materials and, of course, limited time. This continuous clash between endless desires and scarce resources is the core friction that every economic system and ultimately every single business organization is literally trying to solve.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how Abraham Maslow famously categorized those unlimited human wants. Starting right from the bottom, we have our basic physiological needs, the things we literally require to survive, like air, water, and food. Once those baseline demands are met, we immediately look for safety and security. Then we move up to social needs, seeking love, belonging, and community. Above that is esteem, that deep-seated need for respect, recognition, and status. And finally, at the very pinnacle, we reach self-actualization. That's the profound desire to become the absolute most that one can be. Think about it for a second. Every product, every service, and every training program you have ever engaged with fits perfectly somewhere onto this pyramid.
But how do we actually satisfy those incredibly complex, layered needs? Well, we only have 4 scarce factors of production available to us. First, we've got natural resources, land, water, minerals. Second, human resources, or labor, the limited time, physical effort, and intellect of people. Third is capital. And keep in mind, this isn't just financial money. It's the machinery, the software, the buildings, and the technology used to actually manufacture things. And fourth is entrepreneurship. That is that special, risk-taking human ability to combine the other 3 resources to innovate and build something entirely new. Managing these 4 scarce resources effectively, that's the entire game.
Moving on to Section 2, the role of organizations. This is basically society's solution to that massive scarcity problem.
Think of businesses as the vital mechanisms, the actual engines that enact the economic principle. This principle is the fundamental rule guiding how individuals and businesses logically allocate those scarce resources we just talked about. The goal? To satisfy our unlimited wants with absolute maximum efficiency. In a market economy, organizations are the vehicles taking raw materials, capital, and labor and transforming them into valuable goods. Honestly, without them, society would simply grind to a halt.
And the modern business organization has a highly multifaceted role. We so often reduce businesses to mere profit-making machines, but today's reality is far more complex than that. To survive and thrive today, a modern business has to navigate incredibly strict legal frameworks, ensure ethical transparency, and actively support their communities. We rely heavily on them to be catalysts for positive change. They're constantly having to balance the pursuit of economic growth with environmental and social stewardship. So, what is the actual, tangible value they bring to the table? Well, beyond providing the essential products we need to survive, they are the primary source of job creation and the true backbone of economic growth. They engage in corporate social responsibility, or CSR, meaning they give back to the community and ensure sustainable practices over the long haul. They create wealth, and not just for founders, but for stakeholders, employees, and the broader economy. And crucially, they drive innovation and development. Every single time an organization solves a societal problem, they push human progress forward.
Section 3, 3 levels of management. We're zooming right into the microstructure of the business now.
Every structured organization operates across 3 primary levels of management. At the top, you have upper management. That's your CEO, COO, or board of directors. Their absolute focus is long-term strategy, market positioning, and the overarching vision of the company. Right below them is middle management. Think of a regional director, a plant manager, or a department head. They are the great translators of the business world. They act as the crucial bridge turning that high-level abstract strategy into concrete actionable plans.
And finally, we have lower management, like shift supervisors or team leads. They manage the day-to-day operations and directly support the frontline employees. Actually, take a second to mentally place your own current or maybe future role within this framework. How does information flow to you, and who do you communicate it to? Because communication really is everything here. Management sits at the absolute center of a very complex web. They are continuously filtering decisions down to internal departments like operations, marketing, finance, and human resources, while simultaneously managing some pretty delicate relationships with external stakeholders like consumers, the government, and the local community. It all starts with and entirely revolves around effective leadership, ensuring all these disparate parts move in total unison toward a unified goal.
And that brings us to Section 4, Core Management Functions. This is where tactics meet strategy. To make sense of a manager's vast responsibilities, we rely on the POLC framework: planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. First up, management has to forecast future sales and anticipate market shifts, and then begin planning the precise objectives to hit those targets. Second is organizing. This is the structural heavy lifting, arranging the capital, the technology, and the workflow so those plans can actually be executed efficiently. Third is leading and coordinating, and this requires a highly specific mindset. I want you to think of delegation and motivation kind of like tending to a flower. A leader doesn't physically pull the petals to make it bloom, right? Instead, they provide the right soil, the water, the sunlight. Your job is to create the optimal environment for your staff to thrive and execute the vision. You cannot force growth, but you can absolutely orchestrate the conditions that make growth inevitable. And finally, controlling. Establishing metrics, tracking progress, and ensuring the core message and objectives of the business are actively being met, intervening only when absolutely necessary.
And this brilliantly illustrates how those functions come to life in a continuous loop of strategic planning. You establish your goals, you conduct a really thorough analysis of your environment, you rigorously evaluate your resource availability, and clearly identify your constraints. You develop a strategy, implement it, and then monitor the progress. But the crucial point here is that you must adjust the plan dynamically as new data comes in. It is a never-ending cycle of matching extremely limited resources against your soaring strategic ambitions. To do this well requires strictly adhering to key strategic management principles. Yes, decisions must ultimately make economic sense, for sure. But brilliant strategic management is rarely strictly financial. You have to deeply consider social aspects. For example, sometimes paying your labor force significantly more money than the baseline market rate yields far better productivity. It dramatically lowers turnover, and it builds fierce loyalty. In that scenario, higher costs actually drive higher efficiency, satisfying both social needs and business goals simultaneously. True strategy is about motivating staff holistically and, above all, embracing the tough decisions. Taking the time to make those hard, nuanced choices correctly is exactly what dictates an organization's long-term survival. Which brings us to a really empowering takeaway. Strong leaders are not necessarily born, but they can be made through practice and experience. The absolute heart of management is decision-making and leadership. What you should take away from all this is that these aren't magical traits you're just gifted with at birth. They are tangible, robust skills that can be actively developed over time. Just as you learn to tend that garden to help your team bloom, you can rigorously practice forecasting, organizing, leading, and controlling until they become absolute second nature.
Finally, Section 5, Main Economic Systems. Let's zoom out to the macro environment. Okay, zooming way out from the internal anatomy of a single business to massive macroeconomic environments. When you look at it, every single economic system on Earth, absolutely regardless of its political leaning, exists to answer three fundamental questions. First, what products or services are to be produced and in what quantities? Second, how exactly will they be produced? And third, who will they be sold or distributed to? How a society chooses to answer these three specific questions defines its entire economic identity. When we explore the main systems, we see a really vast spectrum of control. A traditional economy, like that of the Maasai community, relies heavily on custom, historical beliefs, and simple barter systems. At the other end, a command economy, such as North Korea, relies on centralized state control, where the government makes literally all resource allocation decisions. Then, of course, we have the free market, driven entirely by private ownership. Socialism, which relies on a mix of ownership with heavy state involvement, and mixed economies, which basically attempt to blend all these elements together.
When we contrast two of the most discussed systems, the free market and socialism, we see vastly different approaches to those three core questions. A free market, like in the United States, uses private ownership and fierce competition as its main engine. And this is incredibly effective at fostering rapid innovation and giving consumers a ton of diverse choices. But it can certainly lead to significant wealth disparities. On the flip side, socialism, often associated with countries like Sweden, focuses heavily on equitable wealth redistribution and ensuring essential services for all citizens. This does a great job promoting social justice, but the high level of central planning and regulation can sometimes result in bureaucratic inefficiencies and reduced incentives for risk-taking. But honestly, in reality, pure systems rarely ever exist. Most modern societies, like Canada, for example, operate as mixed economies. They're constantly trying to find that Goldilocks zone. They leverage the competitive efficiency of free markets to drive innovation and wealth creation, while simultaneously utilizing government intervention to provide public goods like healthcare, regulate tricky industries, and smooth out social inequalities. It is just a constant ongoing balancing act between the private and public sectors.
So as we wrap up our journey today, moving from the massive scale of unlimited human wants down to the daily actions of a manager, I want to leave you with this provocative thought. Are you managing strategically, or are you just reacting to the market? The next time you are allocating your limited resources, whether that's your company's capital or frankly simply your own human energy, remember the frameworks we discussed today. You are a crucial part of solving society's resource puzzle. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep leading with strategy.